Winter had a way of swallowing entire armies. It rolled across the front lines like an endless white tide, turning roads into traps and forests into frozen labyrinths. For the men who marched into this world of ice, the war changed. Bullets were no longer the only enemy. The cold became a living thing, creeping into gloves, sinking through boots, biting deep into their skin, until even their thoughts felt numb. They were soldiers fighting a global conflict, yet in these frozen fields, they were simply human beings, fighting to stay alive. Their rifles grew heavy, their breaths turned to fog, and somewhere out there, beyond the screaming wind, waited a winter so merciless it erased entire patrols without a trace. This is the story of the men who walked into that storm, and the impossible days that followed. They had trained for months, but no training prepared them for cold like this. Fresh faces, still carrying the softness of youth, stepped off the trucks and into snow so deep it swallowed their ankles. Their laughter faded quickly. The wind cut through their coats, finding every gap, every weakness. Some tried to joke about the weather, but their voices trembled, revealing fear beneath forced bravado. They realized fast that the front was not just a battlefield. It was a frozen world, determined to break them before the enemy ever could. They received orders to advance toward a ridge believed to hide enemy scouts. Under normal skies, the route was simple. But as they marched, the storm descended with a fury that felt almost deliberate. Snow blinded them. The path vanished. Their officer tried shouting commands, but the wind devoured every word. They pressed forward anyway, trusting instinct more than instruction. The world became a blur of white, and time stretched into a long, freezing march with no sense of direction. By nightfall, they couldn't tell where they had come from, or where they were going. When the storm finally quieted, an eerie stillness settled over the land. The men could hear nothing but their own breath, their own heartbeat, the soft crack of ice under their boots. They huddled together, crouched in the shallow remains of a snowbank. The silence was suffocating, as if the world itself held its breath. Sleep tugged at their eyelids, whispering comfort. But they knew the truth. In this cold, sleep was a death sentence. One man kept whispering to another, "Stay awake, stay awake." They survived the night not through strength, but by refusing to let anyone face the silence alone. Days passed. Their rations, already light, turned solid as stone. They chipped at them with knives, melting snow over tiny flames that died as quickly as they sparked. Hunger gnawed at them. Their bodies moved slower. Their thoughts dragged under the weight of emptiness. They searched abandoned trenches, overturned crates, anything that might hold a scrap of food. Nothing. Only snow. Endless snow. In the frozen wilderness, hunger became another enemy, the kind that struck quietly, relentlessly, and without mercy. They found tracks in the snow, boot prints leading away from the ridge. Hope surged through the men. Maybe their unit had come this way. Maybe they were close. They followed the trail for hours, encouraging each other with whatever strength they had left. But when the tracks vanished into a wind-swept clearing, the truth dawned on them in a sickening wave. These were their own prints, made days earlier. The storm had spun them in circles. They were not closer to safety. They were trapped in a frozen maze. Some nights, they swore they saw movement through the curtain of snow. Dark shapes drifting between the trees. Too quick and too silent to identify. Sometimes it looked like enemy patrols. Other times, like the silhouettes of men they had lost. Exhaustion twisted their senses, feeding fear. Fingers tightened on rifles, hearts pounded in their chests. But every time they approached the shapes, they vanished into the white void. Reality blurred. The mind, pushed beyond its limits, became the battlefield now. One soldier collapsed, frostbite spreading up his legs, skin turning a pale shade of gray-blue. The others lifted him without hesitation, slinging his arms over their shoulders. Each step became a punishment. Snow dragged at their boots like anchors, but not one man suggested leaving him behind. Their breath came out as painful gasps. Their bodies shivered violently, yet they held their formation around him, even when their own survival was slipping away. The bond between them held firm. In the frozen wild, loyalty was their heat. Brotherhood was their shelter. They searched desperately for dry wood. Every branch seemed frozen solid from the inside. Flint barely sparked. Cloth refused to burn. The cold was an enemy that smothered flame with indifference. A tiny fire flickered alive once, only to be blown out before they could warm their hands. The men stared into the darkness where the flame had been, feeling the last thread of comfort slip away. Still, they tried again and again, until numb fingers could no longer strike the match. The night swallowed their hope, leaving them with only each other's trembling breaths. The blizzard returned with a vengeance. Snow piled around them, burying their legs, then their waists. They dug into the side of a hill, carving a shallow cave to hide from the wind. The darkness inside felt eternal. The cold seeped from every direction, a relentless, tightening grip. Some whispered prayers. Others simply stared into the void, waiting for the first sign of dawn. But dawn never seemed to come. The night stretched on, long enough that they wondered if the sun had abandoned them too. At last, clouds broke. Thin light spilled over the horizon, revealing a distant ridge and a sliver of sky untouched by storm. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The men rose slowly, lifting the wounded, gathering their gear, and pushing forward with the last scraps of their strength. Their footsteps dragged, but they moved with purpose now. Every inch they climbed felt like reclaiming something the storm had stolen: hope, direction, the will to keep fighting. As they crested the ridge, the world opened before them. A frozen valley stretched for miles, but far on the horizon, a thin trail of smoke curled into the sky. The men stared, hands shaking, not from cold, but from disbelief. Smoke meant people. People meant shelter. Shelter meant survival. They shouted to each other, voices cracking, and began their descent. The storm had finally loosened its grip. For the first time in weeks, sunlight reached their faces, faint but real. By the time they reached the small cabin in the valley, the men were stumbling, barely conscious. The door creaked open, and warm light spilled onto their frost-covered faces. They collapsed inside, finally surrendering to exhaustion. They were battered, starved, frozen to the bone. But they were alive. They had faced a winter fierce enough to erase entire companies. They had battled hunger, fear, silence, and nature's full cruelty. They had marched through a world that tried to break them at every step. And still, they endured. In the end, the snow did not claim them. The cold did not silence them. The impossible did not stop them. They emerged not just as soldiers, but as survivors of a frozen hell few ever lived to describe.